Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sally Burdett.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. A diplomatic milestone. China and Russia agree to deepen cooperation as they celebrate 75 years of bilateral ties.
Israeli tank fire kills 5 of its own soldiers. And divisions grow within the war cabinet over plans for Gaza's future.
Israel's economy grows by 14% in the first quarter, despite the war in Gaza.
And a man has been charged with the attempted murder of Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who remains in a serious condition.
Beijing and Moscow have pledged to deepen their ties and take cooperation to a new level.
President Xi Jinping has held talks with Vladimir Putin in Beijing, the Russian president's first overseas trip since being sworn in for a 5th term.
The two countries are celebrating 75 years of diplomatic relations, with the leaders signing a number of agreements, including on trade, environmental protection, border inspection and media cooperation.
Our correspondent Dong Shui has more from Beijing.
The two heads of state signed a joint statement earlier in Beijing to strengthen the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two nations. Well, it's a clear sign of the deepening ties between China and Russia, and especially in a year marking the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations. And in a joint press conference, Chinese President Xi Jinping said the stability and the strength of relations between China and Russia are the result of what he calls the 5 insists: mutual respect, win-win cooperation, long-lasting friendship, strategic support, and fairness and justice. Beijing said the basis of their ties is non-alliance, non-confrontation, and not targeting any third party. The two sides say they are willing to work hard for a long-lasting friendship and to deepen cooperation in areas such as security, education, culture, and the economy and trade. And that said, last year bilateral trade reached a record of $240 billion, surpassing the target of $200 billion ahead of schedule. As Chinese Foreign Ministry has put it, that Russian natural gas fuels many Chinese households here, and Chinese manufactured automobiles run on Russian roads. And also promoting cultural and people-to-people exchange is another key part of the 75th anniversary celebrations this year and the year to come. And that means more students, tourists, and cultural activities organized by the two countries. And in terms of the Ukraine crisis, Russian President Vladimir Putin said Moscow is open to dialogue on Ukraine, but any negotiations, I quote, must take into account the interest of all countries involved in the conflict, including Russia, end of the quote. He said he appreciates China's 12-point proposal for a political settlement, describing it as a sincere contribution to stabilize the situation. President Xi also reiterated the importance of the political settlement proposed by Beijing. He said China hopes peace and stability return to Europe as soon as possible, and that Beijing is willing to continue to play a constructive role in achieving that aim. They also reached a consensus on resolving the pressing Palestinian crisis based on the two-state solutions.
Well, let's talk now to Andrei Kortunov, who's academic director of the Russian International Affairs Council. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you. So this, the first overseas visit from Putin since he started his new term as president. How significant is this?
Well, first of all, of course, it's a matter of courtesy because Chairman Xi made his first overseas trip to Moscow a year ago, and Putin has to pay in kind to that. It is important also practically because China stands out as the most important strategic partner of the Russian Federation. The two countries are members to a number of institutions like BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They often vote unanimously within the United Nations Security Council, where both of them are permanent members. So there are many reasons for Putin to select Beijing as his first destination.
So how important are the economic links between the two countries? How important is China for Russia?
Well, China is now the prime economic partner for the Russian Federation. It accounts for approximately 1/3 of the overall Russia's foreign trade. In terms of Russia's imports, this share is even higher. Maybe it is close to 40% right now. And in some areas, China is clearly dominating Russian imports. For instance, if you take the imports of cars to Russia, last year, China was able to provide Russia with about 900,000 cars, which is clearly a very significant record.
And there's been some discussion between the two about the war in Ukraine, both calling for a political solution. How does Russia see China's role in this?
Well, first of all, we should take into account that the China's plan for peace in Ukraine is not a roadmap. It's not a detailed proposal on stages that should lead to a political settlement. However, it is very important for Russia and for President Putin in particular that China takes a comprehensive approach to the Ukrainian crisis, that it agrees with the Kremlin that it's not just about the relations between Russia and Ukraine, it's also about relations between Russia and the West. And a comprehensive settlement should take into account legitimate security interests of the Russian Federation. I think this is what they are likely to emphasize in Moscow.
Some have seen the relationship between China and Russia as a counterpoint to the West, if you like. Is that how it's being positioned?
Well, it was stated that the partnership between Russia and China is not aimed against any other international players, that it has its own raison d'etre and its own foundations. However, it's clear that both countries have to face pressure coming from the West, especially from the United States, and that might be another reason for Beijing and Moscow to stay together.
Andrei, great to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Andrei Kortunov from the Russian International Affairs Council.
To the United States, a truck driver transporting waste material has died after an explosion at the Arizona construction site for the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. The firm says no other injuries were reported and facilities weren't damaged in the blast, which is currently under investigation. TSMC is the world's largest chip maker, whose clients include Apple and Nvidia. Shares in EasyJet have plunged after the low-cost airline reported a larger-than-expected loss in the first half of the fiscal year. Pre-tax losses amounted to $440 million for the 6 months ending March, although they significantly narrowed from the $520 million loss a year earlier. Its CEO, Johan Lundgren, also announced his plans to step down in 2025 after 7 years at the helm.
Saudi Arabia is set to follow the lead of neighbouring countries, such as the UAE, in reducing its reliance on oil. Despite being one of the world's top 20 economies, the kingdom has recognised the importance of diversification to ensure its long-term stability. Our correspondent Yasser Hakim reports.
Saudi Arabia is going through a turning point in its history as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman embarked on a mission to diversify the economy of this oil-rich nation. Reducing dependence on oil achieves a major goal of Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia, which is economic diversification. Officials believe relying on oil for nearly 90% of its revenue is no longer a safe bet.
Supply side will be impacted as we go. Oil fields will mature, gas field will mature, and the number and the size of production of so many countries may shrink because of high cost of investment.
The strategy is based on financing heavily in non-oil sectors, where there is high potential for growth, such as renewable and clean projects, infrastructure, manufacturing, and in sports, by attracting world-class stars like Cristiano Ronaldo. These efforts are led by the Public Investment Fund, one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, which is also expanding into the all-important tourism industry to reduce dependence on religious tourism.
The Public Investment Fund serves as Saudi Arabia's investment arm, playing a dual role in the kingdom's economic development. Firstly, it generates revenue by making investments abroad. Secondly, it focuses on establishing local businesses that contribute to the growth of the industrial sector and create job opportunities. This initiative is particularly crucial as the country's unemployment rate is steadily declining and currently stands at 7%.
China is viewed by Riyadh as a major partner in this ambitious initiative in various industries like AI, electric vehicles, petrochemicals and renewable energy.
China, the second largest economy globally, leads various industries. Bilateral trade between China and Russia has seen substantial growth, reaching $106 billion in 2022, with a projected increase to $120 billion in 2024. The Belt and Road Initiative has played a vital role in strengthening economic ties, benefiting both nations. Furthermore, a significant deal between the central banks of China and Saudi Arabia as part of BRICS, allowing for trade in local currencies amounting to around $5 billion.
And results so far have exceeded expectations. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Finance figures show non-oil revenue jumped 11% year-on-year to reach $122 billion in 2023. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Now, the Israeli economy rebounded in the first 3 months of the year. This is despite the war in Gaza. Gross domestic product grew 14.1% in January to March, compared with the same period last year. Growth was led by a rebound in consumer spending and increased investment, particularly in residential building. That, of course, is in sharp contrast to the fourth quarter of last year, when the economy shrank by almost a quarter, as much activity, of course, ground to a halt in the wake of the October 7 attacks. Well, Michael Ben-Gad is Professor of Economics at City University of London. He joins us now. Prof, thanks so much for joining us. You know, this war has cost Israel an estimated $16 billion already, and yet we're seeing this rebound. Why is it happening?
Well, first, if I may correct the figures that you cited, those are annualized numbers. The quarter-to-quarter changes were not nearly as drastic. Neither was the drop in the last quarter of 2023 and the increase 14%. Again, that's an annualized figure. Overall, the economy has reached, it's still, compared to a year ago, it's a little over 1% smaller than it was a year ago. So we haven't completely recovered from the war, but the trend is definitely upwards. A lot of this has to do with the resilience of the high-tech industry. That's a big factor in Israel's success. Israel remains relatively one of the richest countries in the world, despite everything. But there are, of course, problems. I should also mention in the positive side of the ledger, the Bank of Israel was very effective at stabilizing the economy in the immediate aftermath of the attack of the 7th of October. There was an announcement to sell about $30 billion worth of reserves. In the end, it was only $8 billion that was necessary in order to stabilize the shekel. The shekel has completely recovered. So those are the good things. On the negative side, the budget deficit is going to be at least 7% of GDP this year, which is a lot for a country like ours. And, you know, we still have various issues in terms of how the government allocates its budget, not just in terms of military expenditure, but also in terms of welfare payments to various members of the coalition.
The longer this war continues, will it require different spending decisions from the Israeli government?
Well, that's already been taken into account to some degree. I think there's been a rethink in terms of the defense needs. It's very clear that there was a certain complacency. There was a sense that perhaps we didn't need to spend so much on defense. So now there's a bit of an argument about how much extra, but it's clearly going to be extra, even if the war were to stop tomorrow. It's become clear that our neighbors, or I should say the hostile neighbors, are perhaps stronger than we anticipated, and we're going to have to allocate more money and more human resources as well. So, for example, we're bringing back conscription was down from 36 months for men down to 32. It's going back to 36. Reservists will have to spend more time in the military over the course of a year. That has an effect on the economy as well, because those people are not engaged in productive work.
Yeah, I noticed that, I think it was just today, Israel's talking about support for small businesses, because many people who run those businesses are now basically on the front line. The other interesting factor is this push. We've seen it from Turkey, disinvesting from Israel, and I think it's the fourth largest trading partner. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot of support for Israel. If we look at the sale of Israeli bonds, they have gone up quite significantly. I've been reading US states are actually buying Israeli bonds. So if we look at its relationship with its trading partners, do you see it continuing to enjoy support from its friends?
Look, in the end, it's not about friendship. This is about business. If Israel has things that are useful for the world, and we do sell a lot of capital goods, people will buy them. I don't expect the effect of sanctions to be very, very severe. I mean, there are places that are trying to boycott and things like that. But we've lived with that for the last 76 years. This is nothing new. In the end, we've been able to build industries that can cope with that. So I'm somewhat less concerned. I'm more concerned about the sort of the effect. One of the sort of the effects of the attack was it revealed sort of very strange things about Israel in general. We have a public sector that is not necessarily completely competent, especially the civilian sector. I mean, the defense has more or less recovered. At the same time, the civil society is extremely resilient. A lot of the welfare needs of the people who have lost their homes and are still displaced both in the north and the south by fighting are being met not by the government, but by private charities and civil society. And that's kind of unusual. That's a sort of and I think in the long run, that's actually a sign of a society that will recover.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us, Professor Michael Ben-Gad of City University in London.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The IDF admits 5 Israeli soldiers have been killed by its own tank fire, and tensions within the war cabinet over Gaza's future erupt into a public row.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. Israel's military has confirmed 5 of its soldiers have been killed in northern Gaza after being struck by their own tank fire.
Meanwhile, there is growing tension within the war cabinet over future plans for the Palestinian enclave. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says he opposes Israeli rule in post-war Gaza and has called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to publicly rule it out. His remarks have also been backed by fellow Minister Benny Gantz. Let's speak to our correspondent Martin Lowe in the Israeli city of Sderot. Martin, the death of these 5 Israeli soldiers by Israeli tank fire, what is the IDF saying about it?
Well, the fighting here is at close quarters. Gaza is such a small place. Let me give you an example. Behind me is the besieged city of Jabalia. In front of me is the Israeli artillery. They're basically firing over our heads into the city. From time to time, Hamas is firing rockets back in this direction. A short time ago, one fell short behind me. Now, that's what the Israeli army is saying. They're saying when you fight in such a confined area and an urban environment, that's when mistakes and accidents are more likely to happen. Having said that, this latest incident brings the number of soldiers killed so far from the Israeli army to 278. Now, of those, 44, and that's almost 1 in 6, died as a result of what's being called operational accidents. 22 were killed by friendly fire, 17 in unspecified accidents, and 5 from weapons malfunctions. However, it ought to be said that the Israeli army does always admit when it has a friendly fire incident. A lot of militaries don't, and that's perhaps another reason why the Israeli army is often under such close scrutiny.
And let's take a look at what's happening on the political front, because the defense minister is challenging the Prime Minister to say, no, of course we won't go in and take over Gaza once the war is over. How significant and how deeply troubling is this rift?
Well, these are very, very senior officials in the government, and yes, they have widely differing views. The Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, has publicly challenged the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to lay out what his post-war plans are. He's being supported by Benny Gantz, another member of the war cabinet. What is perhaps significant is that these 2 men are ex-soldiers. They were both generals in the Israeli army. They say it's just not practical for Israel to occupy Gaza once the fighting has ended. It'll be too costly in lives and too costly in finance. They say the only way you can have a lasting peace is that Gaza needs to be governed by some kind of Palestinian authority. However, Netanyahu is obviously angry. He's saying he'll never let Hamas be in charge again. Hamas is the military wing that they're fighting. The army is fighting in the streets. But Hamas political party are the ones who previously ran Gaza. But Netanyahu says they're not coming back at any price. Neither will he accept the Palestinian Authority, which is the body that administers Gaza, the other Palestinian territory. In fact, he's saying the time to appoint a civilian government will not come until the military operation is concluded and Hamas is completely destroyed. However, there is concern both within Israel and without, particularly in the US, who say this lack of a clear post-war plan for the day after is leading to a vacuum, and a vacuum that in places like Jabalia behind me, Hamas is quick to fill and to regroup.
Thank you so much. Martin Lowe coming to us live from Israel.
A temporary floating pier has now been anchored off a beach in Gaza by the US military.
Officials say the delivery of food and other crucial resources from the pier could begin in the next 24 hours. The main border crossing for aid deliveries in Rafah in the south of Gaza has been closed since Israeli forces began a ground offensive there on May the 6th. The United Nations says since then at least 600,000 Palestinians have been forced to flee the city.
Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari is in central Gaza.
As was said by the United Nations, 600,000 Gazans have already been moving from their places to different areas. That includes Rafah, that includes Al-Zaytun neighborhood and Jabalia neighborhood, and the number is increasing by the minute. I was in Deir al-Balah area and I was moving also Al-Nusayrat area. I was seeing the number of people who were walking down the streets The streets are overcrowded by the people. People cannot even move. The number in all those areas is increasing by the second. As the war goes on, as the bombardment gets heavier, as the destruction reaches more areas in Rafah, as Zaytun, and in Jabalia, the number of people who are seeking shelter is increasing. The number of people who are losing their homes is also increasing. So there is no solid number. According to some updated statistics, the number of people who are moving is 650,000 Gazans, and the total number of people who are in Rafah is 1.1 to 1.2 million. So you can imagine the remaining number of people who are trying now to find shelter in all different areas of the Gaza Strip. So their suffering is continuous, and also facing that scarcity of the resources when they want to erect tents and they want to access water for washing or for showering or for drinking. They're moving. This very big mass of people is moving, and people continue to suffer, and people continue to find nothing to rely on to survive.
Akram Al-Satari in Gaza. Well, South Africa is back at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, this time asking for new emergency measures over Israel's Rafah offensive.
South Africa has already brought forward a case accusing Israel of acts of genocide. The United Nations top court instructed Israel in January to take all measures to prevent genocidal acts in Gaza, but stopped short of calling for a ceasefire. Let's talk to our correspondent, William Denslow, who's outside the court in The Hague. So Will, talk us through South Africa's legal challenge at the ICJ.
Well, there was some rather emotional testimony. One lawyer representing South Africa was even brought to tears while describing some of the alleged atrocities committed by Israel in Rafah over recent weeks. The message from South Africa was essentially that certain steps that have been taken by here at the ICJ and elsewhere simply haven't been effective in curtailing some of Israel's actions. That is why they're calling on the ICJ to do more. South Africa is pointedly asking the court, the top UN court in the world, to essentially stop Israel's military offensive in Rafah, to do more to protect civilians in the southern city in Gaza, as well as to allow more humanitarian aid into Rafah. This comes as the United Nations estimates that around 600,000 people have been displaced from Rafah since May 6th alone. The World Food Programme warning that areas of Gaza could be without food and fuel in just a few days. This is a twin-tracked approach by South Africa. Back in December, they called for the ICJ to investigate whether Israel had violated the Genocide Convention. But this pointed attack that we're hearing here at the ICJ this week is just on Rafah. That's a decision that the ICJ could take within weeks. But the wider issue of whether the Genocide Convention has been violated, that's still a decision that could take years.
Israel strongly denying those accusations of genocide. What could happen next in this case?
Yeah, there's been strong rebuttals from Israel, really pointedly and consistently for a number of months now, saying that they have acted within the parameters of international law, is saying that they are taking steps to protect civilians. They have described South Africa as being the legal arm of Hamas. That was a point reiterated by an Israeli government spokesperson to me just a few hours ago, saying that it was an effort by South Africa to delegitimize the International Court of Justice, calling for the judges here to dismiss these new accounts brought forward by South Africa. It will be Israel's turn to make their arguments directly to the judges here at the Peace Palace behind me during early proceedings on Friday morning here in The Hague, and then it will be up to the judges to make deliberations which could take a couple of weeks. As far as South Africa is concerned, they hope that they rule in their favour. That could then prompt action from the UN Security Council to decide whether to use more United Nations legally binding teeth to take action against Israel.
Will, thanks very much. Our correspondent William Denslow in The Hague.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're live in Slovakia, where a man has been charged with attempted murder after the shooting of Prime Minister Robert Fico.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference.
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Sally Burdett and me, Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. A diplomatic milestone. China and Russia agree to deepen cooperation as both celebrate 75 years of bilateral ties.
Israeli tank fire kills 5 of its own soldiers as divisions grow within the war cabinet over plans for Gaza's future.
A man has been charged with the attempted murder of Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico. The 71-year-old has been described as a lone wolf, with no one else suspected of being involved.
Fico, who was shot several times on Wednesday, remains in intensive care, where his condition is described as serious but stable. Calls for calm and unity have come from all political parties as the country tries to come to terms with the violent attack. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez is in Bangsa Bystrica. Now, Pablo, thanks for joining us. What is the latest on the Prime Minister's condition and also any more details about the suspect?
Well, recently we heard from President-elect, Slovak President-elect Peter Pellegrini, who visited Prime Minister Robert Fico here at the hospital. He says that he remains in critical condition after being shot a number of times yesterday. This all happened in the town of Hadlova in northeastern Slovakia. Mr. Fico was there for a political meeting. He approached a group of people that had gathered there, and then all of a sudden, one man pulled out a gun and fired multiple times against him, striking him in the abdomen and other parts of his body. After that, he was airlifted to FD Roosevelt Hospital here in Banska Bystrica, and he underwent 5 hours of surgery. 2 surgical teams were trying to stabilize him. Now, Earlier today, we heard from doctors here. They say that one of the complications to his health is the fact that back in 2016, he underwent heart surgery and had been taking heart medication ever since then. Now, earlier today, I spoke with the president-elect. I asked him about his visit with the prime minister and what they talked about, and this is what he had to say.
Of course, the situation is now still very critical. And in front of the Prime Minister are now really very difficult hours and days. And, you know, it was a very personal discussion about how he feels, and that I am very happy that he survived. I told him that we stand behind him and we think about him and we're sending him a lot of energy.
And the suspect is a 71-year-old writer. He has been charged with attempted murder, and if found guilty, he could face between 25 years to life in prison. Now, President-elect Pellegrini and Slovakia's President Zuzana Čaputová have been calling for unity across all political parties and with citizens of this country. They say they want to restore civility to politics and remove violence from the political discourse.
Yes, he is at this point believed to have acted alone, but politicians nonetheless really concerned about how this may destabilize the situation. Just tell us a little more about what is the message coming from across the political spectrum.
Yeah, we heard earlier today from the president-elect. One of the things he said is that he is thankful for the show of support that has come from political leaders across Europe and across the world, basically standing by Slovakia in this difficult time. Now, there is the question of the line of succession, and that is something that is being worked out right now. Mr. Pellegrini says that the coalition right now, which is formed by three main parties, has to get together, and they have to designate who will be the person, the minister, that will carry on with the business of government since the prime minister has been incapacitated.
Thank you very much, Pablo Gutierrez, coming to us from Slovakia.
Now, there have been big profits for the world's biggest retailer. Walmart shares rallied after quarterly earnings overshot expectations, lifted by bargain hunters looking for discounts. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, Walmart's helped out by this high inflation that the US has been seeing.
I like talking about Walmart, you know, it's one of my favorite topics here. And part of the reason is it is just the world's biggest shop, you know. It is in so many ways. They have the biggest buildings, the biggest car parks. Do you know they employ 2.1 million associates? Yeah, that's a staggering number of people. They don't call them employees or staff, they call them associates. 2.1 million. It's a juggernaut of a company, is Walmart. It really is. And in the UK, where you are, they used to own Asda. Now, they don't completely anymore. They got out of it in 2021. They still own a stake, I think. I think they have a seat on the board there, and they certainly have a relationship with European companies, of course. But anyway, Walmart turned in a very strong start to 2024. Today, this is because they managed to attract high-end customers or higher-end customers, because traditionally Walmart's base of customers is the lower end of the earning scale, if you see what I mean. They sell everything very, very cheaply. And they do literally sell everything, by the way, but they've attracted a higher-end customer, mainly because they have good digital and online services now, and their adverts have been very well targeted to bring those people in. Their online sales in North America were up 22%, and their guidance for the whole year was increased. And it is an inflation play because, as you know, we've seen in just the last couple of days, we had PPI, the producer wholesale inflation, coming in higher than expected. Yesterday we had CPI, the consumer inflation, coming in lower than expected. Retail sales yesterday, officially anyway, completely stagnant, absolutely just zero growth or zero decline for that matter either. And we've had a number of very positive comments from the chairman of the central bank, who was speaking in the Netherlands just in the last couple of days about interest rate cuts and stuff like that. But so here, the world's biggest shop giving us these strong earnings tell us that the consumer is holding up, which is good because it means the economy here is slowing, which they want, but not too much. And the CFO, who's called John Rainey, he's the chief financial officer, and he's been telling CNBC here that part of their success this quarter was the difference in price between cooking at home and cooking, having somebody else cook for you in a restaurant or any kind of fast food joint, because those prices have gone up exponentially. Of course, it's more expensive to cook at home now because everything is more expensive, but it's less expensive to eat at home, and that's boosted their grocery division. And they are essentially a grocery store, really. That's really what we think of when we think of Walmart. They do literally sell everything because they have so much floor space. But groceries is the core of their business. So they were up 14% before today, and now they're up 6%. So a good start to the year for Walmart.
So Walmart's a huge name in the US, obviously, as you say, but some Chinese companies making headlines there too.
JD.com stands for Jingdong.com. Shares up 1% now. They beat, and they did it through what they call flash price cuts. So again, using the web and all that kind of stuff, they suddenly introduced, hey, look at this, a real bargain. And people go, oh, great, I'll have some of that. So they did very well, JD.com, the huge Chinese e-commerce platform. Now, they did better, I think, overall, really, than Alibaba, who gave us their results on Tuesday. Ali's shares are up 7% at the moment, but their profits were down 86% because of all the competition they face, including from JD.com. And Baidu, which we think of as China's Google, shares up between 1/10 and 1/5 of 1% at the moment. They also beat. They did this through their advertising business and their cloud business. And Ernie, which is their AI bot, has 200 million active users. ChatGPT is not available in China, by the way. And the next big earning will be NVIDIA. And that, of course, is the AI chip maker. That comes up next week, I think May the 22nd, which is Wednesday, if I remember rightly. NVIDIA shares are up 1/3 of 1%. And John Deere, this is important to mention, John Deere, the tractor people, you know, the yellow and green tractors. John Deere is an international company. They sell overseas. That's what they do. But farmers here at home in America have reduced demand for their product because basically crop prices have been falling. And when farmers get a lot for their crops, they expand their business by buying tractors and things, so they're not doing that at the moment. So Deere reduced its guidance and its shares are down 4%. But we have an even bigger story. Do you want to know what it is? I'll tell you.
Absolutely.
The Dow Jones has just crossed over 40,000, thank you, 40,000, slight delay there, 40,000 for the very first time. Now, this is interesting because when I came to America 22 years ago, the Dow was at 9,700. And now, 22 years later, it's just for the first time ever crossed over 40,000. It's down now at 39,984 after relatively sort of hawkish sort of comments from various members of the banking community and the sort of you know, the Federal Reserve Board. They've been commenting, suggesting that maybe inflation is going to take longer to bring down to 2% and all that. So it's not over 40,000 now, but it has done for the very first time within the last couple of hours. And that is because the earnings for the first quarter have been much better than anybody expected, and because of the hope of an interest rate cut coming up before the election, which will stave off any recession further down the road or any slowdown further down the road. On the one hand, history is being made right now. On the other hand, Robin, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans.
John, thank you very much. Our correspondent John Terrett there in New York.
Now, Americans are noticing more products getting smaller while remaining the same price. It's called shrinkflation, and it's a very real corporate practice designed to maximize profits, especially during times of high inflation. Now, with US inflation subsiding, shrinkflation has become an election issue. CGTN's Nathan King reports.
You get to charge the same amount, and you got about, I don't know, 10% fewer Snickers in it.
So this is the infamous Snickers bar made famous by Joe Biden in his State of the Union speech. And while the company that makes these Mars says, look, they haven't been getting any smaller in any size that we do. But many Americans feel when it comes to their favorite snacks and day-to-day purchases, that things have been getting smaller, but not cheaper.
Yeah. Everything been getting smaller.
Really? Like what?
Like Subway sandwiches, everything.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know, man. Just inflation.
There's a bunch of air in the chip bags.
Not a lot of chips, a lot of air. For sure.
Hot chews and stuff like that, candies.
Do you find that packages are getting smaller?
Yeah, in the package, yeah. When they come in the little thing, it's more of like 5 of them now.
How many were there before?
It was probably like 10.
Reducing the size of a product is often preferable to raising prices for companies, especially during periods of high inflation, thinking many consumers won't notice. And while inflation is down from its high of 9.1% in June of 2022 to just over 3% today, inflation and shrinkflation are still election issues. Politicians are learning what economists have known for decades, that consumers and therefore voters remember and record the prices of everyday items far more than larger purchases made less often. So the price of a candy bar or a gallon of milk may very well sway consumers and potentially voter choices. For the incumbent president, this is a problem for his re-election campaign. While inflation is down, polls say people aren't feeling much relief at the grocery store. Tackling shrinkflation, or being seen to do so, is a way of showing empathy with consumers. The Biden administration is backing legislation that would make shrinkflation a deceptive business practice and allow lawsuits against companies that engage in the practice. The Biden administration is also going after so-called junk fees that corporations slip into bills at hotels, restaurants, cell phone companies and other businesses that aren't disclosed up front. Despite data showing that the US economy is generally pretty strong, the polling is going in the opposite direction. Recent polling said that only 38% of voters trusted Joe Biden on the economy, while the number was over 60% for Donald Trump. Tackling inflation and being seen to tackle shrinkflation is perhaps a way of stopping Joe Biden's poll numbers from shrinking anymore. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
France has declared a state of emergency in its Pacific territory, New Caledonia, after 4 people were killed in riots. Military reinforcements were sent to the island, and the online sharing platform TikTok is now banned by the French government. Unrest entered a 3rd day in response to voting reform that allows French residents who've lived in New Caledonia for 10 years to vote in provincial elections.
A new Dutch government will be formed after a coalition was agreed by 4 right-wing parties led by anti-Islam populist Geert Wilders' PVV party. The deal comes almost 6 months after the far-right leader won the election, attracting a quarter of the national vote. The deal bars Wilders from becoming prime minister after the parties couldn't find a way to work under his leadership, but the government will look to opt out of EU migration rules.
Chinese online retailer Temu is facing legal action in the EU. It's been accused by 17 companies of failing to protect consumers from unsafe products and manipulative practices that are illegal under new EU legislation. Temu says it's committed to complying with different rules in global markets. Since its launch 2 years ago, Temu's become one of the most popular online marketplaces in the world.
At least 3 people have been killed and 16 others injured following an explosion in an apartment building in the German city of Düsseldorf. The blast took place in a shop on the ground floor, starting a fire that quickly engulfed the building. More than 100 firefighters were sent to battle the blaze. Police are investigating the cause of the explosion.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The road to Paris 2024 Olympic qualifiers kick off in Shanghai, with hundreds of athletes vying for a spot in the Summer Games.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The World Today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. The migrant crisis at the US-Mexico border has eased in recent months as Mexico clamps down on migrant flows from its side of the border.
But as our correspondent Tony Waterman explains from Texas, lawmakers aren't letting one of the most important issues on voters' minds fade into the background before November's election.
A group of migrants attempting to cut through a barbed wire fence at the Texas-Mexico border this week met by National Guardsmen holding pepper spray rifles. At least 7 canisters are fired off, dispersing the crowd. The group of about 150 people, including women and children, retreat to a nearby embankment.
They don't care that we have children. They attack us, they throw gas canisters at us, they throw tear gas at us. The road here was hard, but the hardest thing here is that they won't let us fulfill our dreams.
There are no more migrants. No more have come. We are the only ones in the middle of this desert, in the middle of this scarcity. Please, we are carrying children. What else can I say?
Nearly 2.5 million migrants were apprehended at the U.S. southern border last year, a record. The numbers have fallen sharply since the start of the year as Mexico steps up efforts to stop migrants from reaching the U.S. border. Still, immigration remains a top issue for American voters heading into this year's election, and some lawmakers are pressing ahead with controversial legislation and policies.
On Wednesday, all 17 justices on the conservative-leaning Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral arguments on Texas's border buoys, an inflatable barrier set up in the middle of the Rio Grande River. The state says it's necessary to deter migrants, but the Biden administration argues that securing the border is the federal government's job, not states.
For now, the 1,000-foot-long string remains in place as the battle plays out in the courts. Meanwhile, in Arizona, lawmakers continue to wrestle over a border bill that would allow police to arrest people they suspect of crossing the border illegally, while the state courts would have the power to deport them, possibly to third countries. It's a bill spearheaded by conservative Republicans.
The invasion at our border is a catastrophe. While others like to talk, I'm the only one who's getting things done.
The party, though, is struggling to get all members on board, and a Senate vote meant to happen this week has now been postponed. Even if it passes, Arizona's Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, has vowed to veto it, the way she did a similar version earlier this year.
This bill does not secure our border. On the contrary, it will be harmful for communities and businesses in our state and a burden for law enforcement personnel.
The immigration crisis may not be making headlines, but it's still front and center for lawmakers this election year. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
The Olympic qualifier series has kicked off in Shanghai.
460 athletes from 120 countries and regions are competing for their spot at the Paris Olympics this summer. Our correspondent Wu Bin reports.
Break, climb, skate, and ride.
This is the final stage for the 464 athletes from around the world vying for the Paris Olympics 2024. The Olympic Qualifier Series, or OQS, starts this week. First up, Shanghai.
So what is OQS? In 2021, the International Olympic Committee approved Olympic Agenda 2020+5 as the new strategic roadmap for the IOC and the Olympic movement till up to 2025. And the next year, in 2020, the IOC launched the Olympic Qualifier Series. 4 sports were included: BMX freestyle, breaking, skateboarding, and sport climbing.
We must keep the Olympic Games relevant to the community, to the people. And these sports are very relevant to the new generations, to the younger generations.
Here we are at the competition venue of OQS Shanghai. Some athletes are now practicing at the venues around me. They will be competing at this beautiful urban park alongside the Huangpu River from Thursday to Sunday.
Feel good. The park is pretty well. I like it so much, and I think it's a good park for me.
So will the athletes qualify for the Olympics if they win in OQS Shanghai? Well, not necessarily. The OQS is adopting a point system. For BMX freestyle, sport climbing, and breaking, athletes will compete for a maximum of 50 points here in Shanghai and another 50 points in Budapest. And for skateboarding, the point system is divided into 3 parts. 1/3 weightage will be given to results of prior competitions, 1/3 to results of OQS Shanghai, and the remaining to OQS Budapest. In total, over 150 spots for Paris 2024 will be secured by athletes following the series.
This is a new Olympic experience for the athletes. It cannot get closer to the Olympic Games. I met a few yesterday, I met a few this morning. They are blown away by the setup here, by the park. And we should praise the city of Shanghai. We should praise the local organizing committee. We have a fantastic venue here.
China has 28 athletes participating in the 4 sporting categories of the OQS this year. Apart from that, 3 Chinese athletes in sport climbing and 1 Chinese athlete in breakdancing have already secured their spots for the Paris Olympics 2024. Moving CGTN, Shanghai.
Chinese traditional fine arts and crafts have taken centre stage during London's Craft Week.
A number of Chinese exhibitors are displaying their modern interpretation of traditional crafts with clothes, ceramics, jewellery and more on show at the annual event. This year's theme is Chinese design, harmony in diversity.
Art graduate Shui Cheng says her jewellery demonstrates the development of the region.
The traditional pattern actually is from the dies architecture. And also the bamboo weaving is also part of the dies building. So I mix the really traditional patterns and the bamboo house together, which is showing the developing of the countryside of Yunnan.
The headlines again. A diplomatic milestone. China and Russia agree to deepen cooperation as both celebrate 75 years of bilateral ties.
Israeli tank fire kills 5 of its own soldiers as divisions grow within the war cabinet over plans for Gaza's future.
And a man has been charged with the attempted murder of Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico, who remains in a serious condition.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks so much for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, it's goodbye.